You know the story. It's been told to you your whole life. Work hard. Wake up early. Put in the effort. Sacrifice. Eventually, you'll make it. You'll be successful. You'll be rich. It's the American dream. The bootstrap narrative. The foundation of how we understand success in this country. And it's functionally false. Not because hard work doesn't matter. It does. But because hard work is necessary for success without being sufficient for it. You can work harder than anyone in your life and still not get rich. Meanwhile, people who don't work particularly hard get wealthy all the time. The difference between them has almost nothing to do with how hard they work and almost everything to do with what systems they were born into. Today, we're going to talk about why the hard work narrative is so damaging. What's actually happening in the American economy that the narrative obscures, and why understanding this is the first step toward making decisions that might actually build wealth. The wage stagnation that contradicts the narrative. Let's start with the data that most people don't see or don't want to acknowledge. For the past 50 years, American productivity has increased dramatically. Workers produce more per hour. Technology multiplies their output. Efficiency improvements compound. In 1970, the average American worker produced about $17,000 of economic value per year when adjusted for inflation. In 2020, the average American worker produced about $67,000 of economic value per year. Productivity has increased roughly 400%. Now, let's look at what workers are paid. In 1970, the average worker earned about $5,500 annually when adjusted for inflation. In 2020, the average worker earned about $56,000 annually. Productivity increased 400%. Wages increased roughly 10 times. Wait, let me recalculate that. That doesn't sound right to me either. Let me be more careful. In 1970, real average wage was approximately $11,000 in today's dollars. In 2020, real average wage was approximately $56,000. So wages roughly quintupled, but productivity increased 4 times. That means productivity increased faster than wages. Workers are producing dramatically more value than they're being paid for. The gap between value produced and wages paid has widened. This is not an accident. This is the design of the system. Workers are working harder, producing more, and a smaller portion of the value they create is coming back to them as wages. The rest is going to capital owners, to shareholders, to management, to the people who own the systems, not the people who work within them. This is the part the hard work narrative doesn't address. You can work harder, you can be more productive, and if you're working as an employee, more of the value you create goes to the owner, not to you. The wealth gap that has nothing to do with work ethic. Let's look at actual wealth in America. The top 10% of Americans own approximately 70% of all wealth. The bottom 50% own approximately 3%. Now, is this because the top 10% works 10 times harder? 20 times harder? No, the data on work hours shows the opposite. Many high-earning Americans work fewer hours than lower-earning Americans. What creates the wealth gap is not hours worked. It's access to capital. The top 10% has access to investment capital. They can buy assets. They can own businesses. They can deploy money in ways that generate returns. The bottom 50% is working to survive. They're earning wages. They're spending those wages. There's nothing left to invest. A person working 60 hours a week in a service job is never going to accumulate wealth through hard work alone. They'll accumulate wages. Those wages will go to rent and food and healthcare and transportation. A person working 40 hours a week in a job that pays $100,000 per year can save $30,000 to $40,000 annually. Over 30 years, that becomes wealth. It's not the person working 60 hours who's working harder, but it's the person working 40 hours who's building wealth. The hard work narrative obscures this. It tells you that effort determines outcome. The evidence shows that access to capital determines outcome far more reliably than effort does. The intergenerational wealth transfer the system ignores. Here's the piece that really reveals how rigged the system is. In America, The single largest determinant of your wealth by age 35 is not your income or your work ethic. It's how much money your parents had. If your parents were wealthy, they likely helped with education. They likely helped with housing. They likely gave you access to networks and opportunities that directly increased your earning potential. If your parents were poor, you likely had to finance your own education through debt. You had to work through school. You had to take any job available after graduation, regardless of whether it paid well, because you needed income immediately. The person whose parents gave them a $100,000 down payment on a house doesn't work harder than the person who has to save a down payment while working full-time. But the first person builds equity. The second person is 30 years behind before they even start. Intergenerational wealth transfer happens through money, works, and access, and it dwarfs the impact of individual work ethic. The wealthiest families in America didn't become wealthy because the current generation works hard. They became wealthy generations ago, and now they're deploying inherited capital and inherited networks. The person born into a wealthy family starts the race 100 yards ahead. They can coast and still win. The person born into poverty has to run twice as hard just to stay in place. This is not a statement about individual effort or character. This is a statement about how the system actually works. The education debt trap that neutralizes advantage. The narrative says, work hard, get educated, your future is secure. The reality is, getting educated costs $250,000, and you're spending your 20s and 30s paying it back. The average student loan debt for college graduates is now approximately $37,000. For medical school or law school, it's often over $200,000. You graduate, you have a good job, but you're spending $800 to $2,000 monthly on student loans. That's money that's not going to building wealth. That's money that's servicing debt for the privilege of having been allowed to get educated. Meanwhile, the person whose parents paid for their education graduates with zero debt. They earn the same salary, but they're investing that $800 monthly instead of paying it to a loan servicer. Over 30 years, that's a $2 million difference. You work hard to get educated. The education costs money you don't have. You take on debt. You spend decades paying for the privilege of being allowed to work. The person born wealthy doesn't work as hard, but they end up way ahead because they didn't have to finance their own education. The healthcare and emergency trap. Here's another way the system is rigged against working people. You're working hard. You're earning good income. You're building savings. Then something happens. A health crisis. A car breaks down. A family emergency requires travel and money. For a wealthy person, this is a financial inconvenience. They have emergency reserves. They have options. For a working person, this is a catastrophe. One medical emergency creates debt that takes years to pay off. That debt stops wealth building. That debt becomes the priority. The working person can work as hard as they want, but unexpected expenses that would barely touch a wealthy person's wealth can completely derail a working person's financial trajectory. This is not about laziness or bad planning. This is about the vulnerability that comes from living paycheck to paycheck despite working full-time. The system is not rigged against laziness. It's rigged against anyone without accumulated capital to absorb shocks. The actual mechanism of wealth building nobody talks about. If hard work doesn't make people rich, what does? Capital. Deployed capital that produces returns that exceed the returns to labor. The wealthy are not wealthy because they work hard. They're wealthy because they own things that produce income. They own real estate that appreciates and produces rental income. They own businesses that generate profit. They own stocks that produce dividends. Every dollar they own as capital is working for them, producing returns independent of their effort. The working person is trading hours for wages. The wealthy person is deploying capital that generates returns that compound. One path has a ceiling. The other path compounds indefinitely. This is not mysterious. It's just not talked about openly because it contradicts the hard work narrative. The way to get wealthy is not to work harder. It's to own capital, to deploy it intelligently, to let it compound. But you can't own capital if you don't have it. And if you're born without it, and without help from family, accumulating it while working to survive is nearly impossible. What this actually means. This is not an argument that hard work doesn't matter. It matters. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient, and pretending it is obscures what actually determines outcomes. If you're born into poverty, working hard might get you to middle class. It probably won't make you rich. The hours you spend working are hours you're not spending on acquiring capital or developing skills that increase your earning potential. If you're born into wealth, you can be lazy and stay wealthy. Your capital works for you. Your networks open doors. Your inheritance compounds. The system is not neutral. The system is rigged in favor of capital and against labor. Understanding this is not defeatist. Understanding this is the first step toward making decisions that might actually work within the system rather than against it. If you can't inherit capital, the path forward is to earn income that significantly exceeds expenses, to build emergency reserves, to invest in assets that produce returns, and to understand that wealth building is not primarily about effort. It's about deploying whatever capital you can access in ways that produce returns. The American dream says, work hard and you'll get rich. The American reality is that work hard and you'll probably be okay. Maybe comfortable, but not rich. Rich requires capital. Capital requires either inheritance or earning far more than you spend. The person who works 60 hours a week in a service job and has no family money will never be rich through effort alone. The person who earns $150,000, spends $50,000, and invests the difference will eventually be rich through discipline and time. The difference is not effort. The difference is access to capital and the ability to deploy it. The hard work narrative is seductive because it makes success seem achievable to everyone. If you just work hard enough, you'll make it. But the evidence shows that's not how it works. Effort matters, but systems matter more. Understanding that is not giving up. It's being realistic about how wealth is actually built in America, and that realism is the foundation for decisions that might actually work.